At the northernmost tip of the European continent, an unprecedented geopolitical earthquake is currently taking place. Finland has now indefinitely sealed its massive 1,340-kilometer-long border corridor with Russia. A profound silence now prevails over what was once Russia's largest corridor to the west, where thousands of vehicles and people used to cross every day. Absolutely no crossings are permitted at any of the border crossing points, stretching from Raja Giuseppe to Valima. This is a historic move by Finland that not only protects its own borders, but also shatters Putin's dreams of infiltrating deep into Europe in a single stroke. Because as the Helsinki administration places heavy steel locks on the 8 border crossing points along the borderline, it has actually given the harshest response to Russia's desire to redraw the map of Europe. In line with this goal, the Russian army's massive planned buildup project of 80,000 troops in the north is also turning into a logistical nightmare in this environment of isolation. In other words, the sudden transformation of NATO's longest land border into a closed box on June 4th, when the decision was made, collapses all of Putin's meticulous cross-border calculations while they are still on the drawing board. However, the strategy behind this move is fed by a very painful historical experience that is never erased from the memory of the Finnish people. When we rewind the pages of history, we see how ruthlessly the Soviet Union attacked Finland during the Winter War. In that dark period, Soviet armies occupied 9% of Finnish territory, including Karelia, Vyborg, Salla, and Pechenga. This brutal occupation caused approximately 420,000 Finnish citizens to migrate from the annexed regions, leaving behind their homes, villages, and memories. Finland placed the pain of the lands it lost that day and the devastation caused by the Soviet occupation right at the center of its national security doctrine. At the point reached today, Russia, just as in the past, had escalated its activities of massing troops and military resources toward the Finnish border to incredible proportions in recent years. It is estimated that close to 5,000 to 10,000 Russian soldiers are still deployed near this borderline. Furthermore, we must not forget that insidious hybrid tactic organized by the Russian intelligence service, FSB, with bicycles along the borderlines, aimed at collapsing Europe from within. However, as we can see, Finland is no longer that old, lonely, and defenseless country. With this great lesson learned from the past, the Helsinki administration does not want any Russian military presence on its border today. To prevent even a semblance of that dark occupation move from happening again, all physical roads, crossings, and corridors that could serve Russia have been indefinitely slammed shut in Putin's face. But one must never overlook Putin's oppressive stubbornness over the European and Scandinavian geography. In fact, Finland is also aware of this situation and is focusing on the Russian leader's possible retaliatory responses to the border closure move. For this reason, the Helsinki administration is not only closing the land borderline, but is also increasing physical barriers on the border at an unprecedented pace. In strategically determined areas, 200-kilometer-long fence projects reaching 4.5 meters in height, topped with barbed wire, and equipped with sensors and cameras, have been rapidly implemented. These technological fences are far from being an ordinary border wall, because they feature night vision thermal sensors, autonomous motion detectors, and high-powered speaker systems. This digital shield established along the line can instantly detect even a fox moving in the depths of the forest and transmit it live to the command center in Helsinki. Not settling for this, Finland is taking incredible military measures against Russia, practically transforming its intermediate corridor into a military fortress. The border guard units, known as Rajavartiolaitos, equipped with state-of-the-art unmanned aerial vehicles and thermal sensors, have been heavily deployed to the region. While patrol activities in the area have been tightened, logistical vehicles, heavy equipment, and military resources have been amassed at strategic points just behind the borderline. Additionally, Finland's rapidly growing reservist army stands as the biggest supporter of this process. Thousands of citizens are being put through special combat training and kept on standby against a possible infiltration scenario. On the other hand, Finland has taken its defense line to an international level by accepting multinational troops onto its soil as part of NATO's forward land forces integration. This unprecedented preparation aims to eliminate any kind of hybrid operation and physical infiltration that Russia could carry out using the border right at its source. So, How will this insurmountable wall built by Finland create staggering effects on Russia on the other side of the border? The effects of this move not only cut off Russia's logistical routes, but also directly target its strategic bases in the region. In particular, Russian military bases located quite close to the Finnish border, which have also been detected by satellite imagery, could be among the elements most affected by this situation. The Leningrad military district, which Russia has restructured on its northwest military axis, is directly trapped in the shadow of this massive border wall. Chief among these is the Petrozavodsk garrison, located just 160 kilometers from the borderline and prepared for the new 44th Army Corps. The operational flexibility of this base, planned to have a capacity of 15,000 soldiers, will decrease with Finland sealing the border. The tent camps and logistics depots being feverishly built at the Petrozavodsk garrison could now become nothing more than mere coordinates, since they cannot cross beyond the border. The new artillery brigade established in Kandalaksha in the Murmansk region also has to wait as an isolated force now. Especially the Murmansk region, considered the heart of the nuclear submarine fleets on the Kola Peninsula, will practically lose its strategic shield on the western flank to a certain extent with this border closure. Russia's defense concept, dubbed Bastion, which focuses solely on protecting its own nuclear capacity, is now facing the risk of being completely deciphered due to Finland's increasing intelligence capacity. Likewise, the Severomorsk 2 airbase supporting the Northern Fleet and the Olenya airbase, where strategic bombers are stationed, are now under the constant pressure of Finland's advanced surveillance network. On the other hand, logistical support points and tent camps in and around Kamenka will remain under observation practically 24/7 due to this massive barrier on the other side of the border. All these military bases used to possess the capacity to gather intelligence and conduct hybrid operations by taking advantage of the border's permeability. However, the complete sealing of the border has drastically reduced the likelihood of Russian intelligence and special forces infiltrating Finland. This isolation brings not only a military, but also an economic collapse. As the belief that Russia has strategic depth is shattered, massive metropolises like St. Petersburg have now become the most distinct direct targets within NATO's artillery and missile range. Furthermore, Russia's facilities on the Kola Peninsula, which house the world's largest concentration of nuclear weapons, have lost their shield with the border closure and have begun to bear the psychological burden of practically becoming an open target. This situation has become the biggest factor shaking Putin's overall strategy over the Scandinavian geography to its core. Russia's policy of pressure and intimidation, which it tried to implement on its northwestern flank against NATO's expansion, has suffered a heavy blow. Putin's plans to create gray areas on NATO territory by blurring borders and to expand are largely rendered ineffective by this resolute move. Russia is now turning into an actor forced to remain on the defensive under the careful and sharp gaze of NATO. From now on, the Kremlin administration feels the relentless pursuit of NATO's advanced air patrols and spy satellites in space breathing down its neck with every step it takes. The effects of this situation, meanwhile, have the potential to spread to much wider areas. The closure of the eastern border crossing points between Finland and Russia allows other actors in the Scandinavian geography to take a deep breath as well. Because the Helsinki administration is practically confining Russia to its own cold lands by closing off this 1,340-kilometer land corridor. This situation has narrowed Russia's room for maneuver to a microscopic level in the geography stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Arctic Ocean. This strategic squeezing move has uniquely strengthened the security umbrella of Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Norway directly. Seizing this opportunity, the Scandinavian countries have transitioned to a brand new integration model among themselves, which they call Fortress Nordic, uniting their defense industries and armies under a single roof. Regional actors, under the umbrella of Nordefco, namely the Nordic Defense Cooperation, have initiated joint arms procurements and military supply chains under Norway's leadership as of 2026. In this context, CV-90 armored combat vehicles and new generation CAVS wheeled armored personnel carriers have been standardized across the armies of all three countries, maximizing operational interoperability. In the past, Russia could exert indirect yet highly effective psychological pressure on Sweden and Norway through a crisis it would create over the Finnish border. However, Finland's closure of this massive corridor cuts off Russia's land connection, extending into the depths of Scandinavia and its hybrid operation routes like a knife. Finland's sealing of its eastern border is also steering the Scandinavian countries to build an uninterrupted logistics corridor stretching from west to east. Now, military munitions landing at Norway's deep-water ports can swiftly pass through Sweden and seamlessly reach Finland's defense lines directly. Thus, without the need to use the dangerous waters of the Baltic Sea, a massive, secure supply artery has been created in the heart of Scandinavia. Thanks to this, Sweden's Gotland Island, located right in the middle of the Baltic Sea and serving as a strategic key point, is becoming much more shielded against Russia's sudden raid risks. Initiating its largest military expansion since the Cold War, Sweden has rapidly increased conscription numbers and fortified Gotland Island, known as the unsinkable aircraft carrier of the Baltic Sea, with air defense systems and Leopard 2 tanks. In fact, U.S. strategic bombers have landed directly at the Luleå-Kallax airbase in northern Sweden under this new security concept, bringing deterrence in the region to a peak. Similarly, Norway has seen the Russian pressure it felt in the border regions around the Arctic and the Barents Sea balanced by Finland. Taking it a step further, Norway reactivated the Bardufoss airbase after decades and placed advanced F-35 fighter jets directly into secret hangars inside the mountains. Additionally, the new NATO Air Command Center established in Bodo coordinates the airspace of all of Northern Europe from a single hub, giving no respite to Russian fighter jets. Even the United Kingdom has not remained indifferent to this new strategic picture, deciding to double the number of specially trained troops deployed in Norway within 3 years. When all these joint steps and Helsinki's border closure move are combined, Russia's situation truly begins to grow much darker. Stepping in between Russia and the rest of Europe like a massive shield, Finland is building NATO's sturdiest fortress in the north. This shield acts as an indispensable strategic bridge that protects not only the Scandinavian countries, but the entire European continent from Russia's unpredictable military and hybrid moves. No Russian hybrid element that fails to cross the Finnish border any longer has the chance to reach the interior lines of Europe or the depths of Scandinavia. This situation has indisputably elevated Finland to a keystone position in the European defense architecture. So, will Russia, whose borders are sealed, bases isolated, and strategic plans disrupted, wait with its hands tied in the face of this historic move? Of course not, because Moscow's military doctrine has always been built on producing asymmetric and unexpected countermoves. Although the moves Russia can make over its land border have been largely overshadowed, Putin still holds the cards of utilizing the sea and airspace. While avoiding a direct conflict in the Baltic Sea, the Russian leader's staff might turn their eyes to the Svalbard archipelago in northern Norway. Low-risk, civilian-appearing hybrid operations that Russia might carry out in this remote and freezing region could be used as an insidious tool to measure NATO's Article 5 reflex. The first possible move could be Russia aggressively increasing its submarine and naval vessel activities in the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. The Moscow administration will begin to much more actively utilize its shadow fleet vessels in Baltic waters, which appear as civilian oil or cargo ships on radar, but actually possess intelligence and sabotage equipment. In particular, critical data cables and energy lines passing through the Øresund Strait and the depths of the Baltic Sea could become the #1 target of these unidentified vessels roaming Russia's dark waters. Furthermore, the Russian Navy, using the security of the Northern Sea Route as an excuse, could further fuel the battle for dominance in the Arctic region, with military radars and intelligence systems concealed on its icebreaker ships. The possibilities of missile tests from nuclear submarine bases on the Kola Peninsula and the tightening of strategic bomber patrols along the borders must also not be forgotten. In addition to this, the Moscow administration, seizing the opportunity of the expiration of the New START nuclear arms reduction treaty, will not hesitate to increase the number of its nuclear missiles in the region and use this as an element of blackmail. Russia might attempt to cross the borders it cannot physically pass in space, orchestrating heavy electronic attacks targeting the critical infrastructure facilities, hospitals, and banking systems of Finland and Sweden. Jamming GPS signals in the region to endanger civil aviation and testing the electronic warfare capacity of Scandinavian countries could also be among the most prominent tactics the Putin regime might resort to. On the other hand, The response time of Scandinavian airspace could be constantly provoked with autonomous unmanned aerial vehicles flown at very close distances to civilian flight corridors, not only at sea and in space, but also in the air. At the same time, it is not impossible for Russia to attempt to keep tensions running high by provocatively executing massive, show-of-force military exercises like Zapad in areas close to the Scandinavian coasts. Despite all these asymmetric threats, the probability of Russia forcefully opening these border crossings closed by Finland using physical force appears quite weak due to the quagmire it is stuck in with Ukraine. Because, for the time being, Moscow has neither the sufficient military strength nor the logistical capacity to launch a large-scale conventional war in the north. In conclusion, Finland's indefinite sealing of its 1,340-kilometer eastern border has gone down in history as one of the most critical geopolitical fractures of this century. This decision has become the clearest symbol of the transition from passive defense to active and uncompromising deterrence in ensuring the security of Europe. In making this decision, Finland risked the economic collapse that its own border towns would suffer, because national independence and security are vital lines that cannot be traded for any commercial revenue. The pragmatic neighborhood era that lasted for years has now been irreversibly shelved into the dusty archives of history. By blending the bitter experiences of the past with modern military strategies, the Helsinki administration has built an insurmountable wall of steel against Russia's expansionist vision. While Putin's plans to destabilize Scandinavia are frozen solid in Finland's snowy taiga forests, NATO has become more integrated and stronger in the north than ever before. These quiet but resolute nations of the north have merged advanced military technology with an unshakable will, creating a new epicenter of military power that will shape the future of Europe. This new security equation has proven to the whole world that Europe is no longer the party merely watching the threats coming from Russia, but rather the party confining those threats at their source. So, what are your thoughts on this matter? Will this historic border closure step taken by Finland force Russia to step back? Or will it cause Moscow to resort to more unpredictable paths in the seas and in space? We look forward to your comments. To make long journeys more enjoyable, we also invite you to Spotify, where we present our video content. Thank you for choosing us. Presented by TGN.